in schools, when teachers are being observed, it is almost always like punitive, or it's like it's a requirement that everyone knows we're going to do once a year. Like principal comes in, sits in the back of the classroom with a clipboard, fills out some stuff because they have to. So we're really big on active coaching. So when we do training, we don't do these big, long training workshops. Like the data on that is not very good. Even if you get the best training workshops where people are doing role playing, they're getting feedback live, the application is about 2 to 5% of those skills. So like we know that number jumps up to like 80% application when you coach. I think the biggest challenge is that all of these technologies, precision teaching, direct instruction, work most effectively when kids are grouped by achievement level. So we call it homogeneous achievement grouping. Like the data on that is through the roof. Like for schools who just switch to that, like just grouping kids based on strengths and weaknesses versus how old they are, we always joke like how tall they are. It's a really strange variable to group kids by how old they are, given that all kids don't start school till like 5 or 6 years old, right? So we kind of just ignore that first 5 years of history, which at least in the US is all over the place, right? If you ever seen a kindergarten classroom, like the range of repertoires is unbelievable.
All right. Hey, welcome. This is the Co-operant Learning Podcast. It's now October as of this recording. So fall is here. I'm in the Midwest fall. So I'm very, very cold in the morning and very, very warm by afternoon, which is a real Midwest problem. But joining us today from the West Coast, which I don't know how you guys experience fall out in the Seattle area or Washington area, but Andrew Kieta, he's the executive director at Morningside Academy in Seattle. Welcome to our show.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I actually grew up in the Midwest, so I know that fall scene very well. Our fall is a lot less interesting. It just kind of comes and then it gets wet and everything gets yellow. So we don't get the leaf change. We don't get the crisp blue days. Like literally fall started yesterday and it's been raining for 3 days. We had no rain for like 100 days and now it'll just rain until, I don't know, May, something like that.
It's wild here because it like anything can happen. And I'm like, yeah, that makes sense. Like it's snowing tomorrow. Like, yeah, that would make total sense. And the next day I'm like in shorts and like mowing my yard again. I don't get it. We were out on the West Coast last summer and we experienced the wind like it was like a tornado almost. I wasn't expecting that, but we were in Oregon by the ocean and I was like, whoa, it's very windy here. And everyone's like, yeah, this happens all the time.
Yeah, it's kind of a different beach scene out here.
Yeah, for sure. Well, thanks for joining us. I've always been really intrigued by the Morningside model, this idea that there's a school that's literally designed for kids falling behind, but also that has really, really great outcomes as well. And so I'm really, really excited to chat with you about what you guys are doing out there. So you're here today. We're going to talk about generative instruction, behavior analysis, and education, things like that. But do you want to kind of open up and tell us a little bit about yourself to kick things off?
Yeah, sure. So I'm the executive director at Morningside. I've been in that role for about 3 years. I got into this kind of in a backwards way. I actually went to undergrad to be a journalist, and I was going to do sports writing and politics writing. And then I started needing some more money. So my mom was a school teacher, and she's like, "You should just be a sub." So I started subbing, and I found through Craigslist, honestly, a school in Columbus, Ohio, where I was living at the time, that served kids with autism, and I had no idea what autism was. In that school, Hogland Learning Center, the director is a pretty amazing guy who had studied with Bill Heward and all the White Book guys, and before that, he had studied with Paul Andronis in Northern Michigan. And Paul has done a lot of really cool work on contingency induction, and he's good friends, colleagues with Kent Johnson, who founded Morningside. So I taught for a year and they sent me out to Morningside for a summer to Morningside Summer Institute to be like, hey, you seem to get this stuff. Seem to get this behavior analysis stuff, this instruction work. We want you to go learn about it more from these people in Seattle and then bring it back. So I did that. And I did that for 2 or 3 summers as a teacher. And then I ran that program for an additional 4 or 5 years. And then at a certain point in there, Kent at Morningside asked me to start working for Morningside at the same time, consulting it to different school implementation projects that Morningside has across North America. And so it was about that time that I decided, like, yeah, I'm doing all this with a journalism degree. I learned a lot about behavior analysis from a lot of really cool mentors, but I decided to go get some more formal instruction. So I went down to North Texas, studied with Jesus Rosales Ruiz on operant variability stuff. And then I worked with Dr. Tracy Sheehan a lot on they were redesigning all of their undergraduate behavior analysis courses around what we know from behavioral ed literature. So I already knew a lot of that stuff. So that was kind of cool timing. So I got to bring a lot of the stuff that I knew from Morningside, like precision teaching, things like talk aloud problem solving. We get to bring that into the mix and redesign those courses. So then about 10 years ago, I came out here full time, first as an associate director and then as the executive director.
Very cool. I'm always amazed at how so many of us did just actually kind of fall into it, like, by the sum of certain events happening. I'm curious, does a journalism degree, have you taken anything from that, like way back in the day? Any like thing that you learned back then that you're still using from learning that?
That's a good question. Nobody ever asked me that. Definitely the writing component. I always like to
Nice.
write. Writing's fun for me, so that always translated over well. Being able to write for like a newspaper audience is all about simplicity. So being able to write for an academic audience should be more simple than it often is, but that translated over really well. But I think another piece is probably just like knowing how to ask good questions,
Oh, cool.
kind of search far and wide, which really taps into what we do at Morningside because we are a laboratory school based on behavior analytic principles. But I mean, schools do so many different things, and especially in education, that we're kind of casting a really wide net on the things that we're looking for when we're looking for the evidence base. So, if we stick to just behavior analytic journals, there's not a lot out there in terms of like curriculum, school policy, those sorts of things. So, yeah, I already came in with a pretty good like a pretty broad understanding of what's going on, a broad like a way to look far and wide for the information you're kind of seeking out.
Gotcha. Well, let's go ahead and talk about Morningside for anyone who's unfamiliar with Morningside Academy, and what you guys are doing out there. Do you want to give kind of like a little bit of a history, maybe the origins and kind of the basic philosophy of what's going on?
Yeah, so Morningside is in its 47th year. It was started by Dr. Kent Johnson in Seattle. He actually started in his living room. He was tutoring kids. He came out to Seattle, was tutoring kids, and they had amazing outcomes. And parents said, just keep them all day, like start a school. So we had a school in his living room, and then, slowly over time, it moved into, I mean, I think it's been in like 17 locations. I tried to track it once with Ken. He can't even remember them all. And it always came out of this idea of building a laboratory school, kind of in the tradition of like John Dewey, who is a philosopher who, outside of our Skinnerian behavior analytic roots, that's kind of the other starting place for Morningside is John Dewey's reflective thinking and John Dewey's work in the turn of the century. And so Kent was really turned on by that. He's like, I want to start my own lab school. And so he's, slowly built it over 40 years. And so Morningside has a lot of different components. So there's the laboratory school here in Seattle. We serve about 80 to 85 kids a year. Grades roughly 3 through 9, kind of ebbs and flows each year. The kids who we get are what people in general ed would call tier 2 learners. So they are not successful in the general education tier 1 classroom. But they're kids who have average to above average IQs. They should be at grade level, but they are the kids who fall through the cracks. I would say they're kind of your typical C and D students of America. Some of them have had poor instructional history. That's why they're behind. A lot of them come in with diagnoses like ADHD, mild learning disabilities, a lot of executive functioning issues. So they're just generally kids who don't love school. They haven't done well in school. A lot of them have gotten really good at avoiding doing anything. So they're kind of the quiet kids in the back of the classroom. But again, they're all kids who should be at grade level. So in Seattle, those kids come here, they spend, 2, 3, 4 years. They get caught up. Kids generally make about 2 years growth per grade level. And then they go back to their public or private school. And the whole time we're kind of running research on looking out far and wide at like, what does research say is high performing curriculum? What are high performing teaching strategies? And then we try them out here in a messy classroom setting. And when the data looks good, then we take those to people all around North America and Europe. So that's kind of the other functions of Morningside. So we have Morningside Teachers Academy, which I coordinate all of that, and we partner with, over 150 schools now, bringing these best practices into place. Right now, I think we've got about 7 or 8 schools that we're working with. And then we bring people every summer, behavior analysts, teachers, educators, school psychs, anyone who's interested in this work to train. that's how I found Morningside. It's an amazing experience. Usually about 35, 40 people come study, spend half the day in the classroom, the rest of the day learning all the different pieces of this model. And then we also do, we publish curriculum. Most of it's precision teaching work.
Mhm.
We're not interested in being a publisher. It's kind of like if there's nothing on the market that has good data or that we can find to fill our needs, then we just do it ourselves. And so then we kind of picked up this dissemination branch called the Wing Institute at Morningside Academy. And that was started by some people in the Bay Area about 20 years ago. And they set up this website, the Wing Institute, that is kind of a dashboard and a clearinghouse for evidence-based practice in education. So really kind of wide scope of what are the things that work well in school. So that's an incredible resource. We maintain that really as a way to get this data, like, to kind of like synthesize and make clear what works, because there's just so much out there. Especially if you're a school teacher, like you don't have time to go digging into the research. So the
Right.
goal of that tool is really to kind of get stuff out to people so they kind of know what to do. So we kind of wear a bunch of hats here, but it all builds off the lab school and the work that we do day to day here.
You said that kids generally make about 2 years of improvement. Was that what you said?
Yeah, so kids here have signed up for something called the Learning Guarantee. So
Okay.
they are guaranteed 2 years of growth in their area of greatest need, or their tuitions are funded. And in 46 or 7 years, it's less than 1%. It's less than that. Like I actually want to redo the data because it's probably less than 0.1%. So kids come here knowing they're going to get caught up. And that's really important. And in general, looking at when we run the end of the year assessments every year and we do the data analysis, depending on what subtests we're looking at, depending on the students, it's usually 1.5 to 3 years growth per child. But those kids who are 2 or more years behind, those are kind of our bread and butter. Those are the kids we really have to make the gains with, because they've got to get. We can't just right the ship and get those kids back on like learning a year per year because they're already behind. So we got to really kind of ratchet it up and get 2 years growth or 3 years growth so they can catch up to their grade level peers.
It's a wild stat. I mean, I know you're kind of saying it very humbly right now, but I mean that's something that is so far out of mind for a lot of educators or organizations that that would even be possible. So it's very very cool. Um, you want to kind of go through? I mean, this is a loaded question, but behavior analysis in education, how behavior analytic principles inform like instructional decision making in Morningside. I know like we could probably talk the whole time about this, but as you add to the evidence base and the literature base, like what types of things from behavior analysis are we taking into like an educational approach in the classroom?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And to your point about being humble about the data, it's one of those things that people always say that, and we kind of forget about it here at the Learning Guarantee, because each of the ingredients of this model have been in place and we know that they work. We don't worry about it. Like I don't even know which students are eligible for that 2 years growth usually until the end of the year. They've got to be 2 years behind. They have to be here a certain amount of days, but there's certain tools that kind of more or less guarantee that we're going to get those outcomes every year. As long as we do them with fidelity, right? You can't just say we're doing
Right.
it. As long as we do them well, they work. And so many of those tools are kind of grounded in behavior analysis. So certainly just our general worldview, how we're approaching day to day, is rooted in operant analysis. So our teachers are kind of a mixed bag of we have a couple of BCBAs here. We have a couple of people who are behavior analysts, but maybe not BCBAs. We have some people who come out of the special ed world who know a fair amount about behavior analysis, but they themselves maybe not, that may have been not their primary area. Then we have a lot of gen ed teachers who they learned about it here for the first time. So we do training workshops with everybody on kind of the basic principles. But it's kind of it's our grounding, certainly from how do we shape student behavior, and it's all behavior, right? Whether or not it's academic behavior or typical classroom behavior. I think that too frequently behavior analysts, when they are working in school settings, get pigeonholed into working on problem behavior or
Hmm.
classroom behavior. And that's too bad. I mean, that's a shift in the literature. If you look at like the early Java stuff, there's a lot of stuff out there on academic behavior. So those basic principles kind of follow through. I mean, we're really big on working on designing for natural reinforcement versus arbitrary reinforcement. So that's a lot of that comes into the details of like how do you sequence the curriculum. So we want students to be able to engage in some behavior, which allows them to access some new behavior, right? Some more challenging curriculum or something that's actually meaningful for them outside of, the 40 minutes they're doing a math fluency block. So with some kids, we do some arbitrary reinforcement stuff early just because they're so reluctant to being in school settings because it hasn't been good for them. But quickly, it's like that's where I think about reinforcement the most and about an operant analysis is like, how do I program out those natural reinforcers for years so that we can get kids to actually be, intrinsically motivated, as people always talk about. So we can design that, right? We can design a series of challenges of the curriculum that get slightly harder and slightly harder and slightly harder. So I'm always on a kick around here with teachers, like extinction isn't bad. It can be. It's not fun to be under extinction conditions, but it's also
Right.
essential for problem solving, for creativity. So a lot of the work that we do with the kids is kind of we talk about seeding the repertoire. Like we're going to teach broadly. We're going to get all the fundamental skills accurate and fluent. Then we get to put in these like new challenging problems, new situations that they are going to face extinction. But now I know they have the repertoire and that they can combine and recombine those skills in a certain combination, a new combination. So they're successful. So we always loosely call that like aha reinforcement. Like when you solve a
Okay.
problem for the first time, you're like, the kids are amazed by it. Like that's really powerful, and that's really powerful to teach, right? When they get to watch kids figure something out, and a lot of kids in gen ed settings, teachers are going for that. They just don't know how to program that, and often it's
Mm,
because all those underlying, we call them tool skills, but fundamental skills, prerequisite skills, if those are shaky, then it's really hard for kids to combine those skills in new ways to solve new problems. So that's kind of like this behavioral engineering approach to problem solving, to thinking, to creativity is like we're going to build it from the ground up. But by the time our kids are in middle school, we want it to look a lot like a gen ed middle school where kids are being given brand new things and the teacher's kind of stepping back and being like, can you solve this? Or I bet you can't figure this one out. And like they do it.
gotcha. It seems kind of opposite to like the ethos of like standardized testing. Like there's like teaching to the test essentially, and then teaching to like be able to find contingencies, solve them, and access new reinforcers that you didn't even know were possible. Is there something to that? Like like I guess what are your thoughts on standardized testing and kind of like where a lot of public education currently is at?
Yeah, I think it's complicated. Standardized testing is a valuable tool when used as a valuable tool. So we use standardized tests at the start and end of the year to show growth. So that's where we think it's really valuable, is to because we want to have some way to measure how our students are performing compared to other students. We've worked in some school districts in some states and some countries where they kind of dropped out standardized testing altogether. And then it's really hard. Everyone's kind of in the wilderness of like not really knowing how their kids are performing or if they're making the progress. So I think that's an important aspect. A lot of schools don't use growth-based assessments, though. They use proficiency tests. So they're
Hmm.
kind of measuring like how are all of our fourth graders doing this year? And that's a snapshot that doesn't really tell me anything about my instruction. It tells me something about that group of fourth graders that year. And there's so many variables that like, yes, instruction's one of those variables, but there's so many things that I don't know that I don't think it's valuable data and it kind of clouds what is important. So standardized testing to show growth over the course of the school year on these kind of big norm tests that are a step away from what's happening day to day, we think that's valuable. But we do a big set of assessments in September when kids get here. They actually spend the first 7 days of school in temporary classrooms where they're doing a bunch of assessments so we can find out what they can do and what they can't do. And then at the end of the year, they do a bunch of end of the year testing. And honestly, in between them, we don't really look at standardized tests. It's really just how does the growth that we see day to day show up on these much less sensitive big tests that I can take to a school district and be like, look at the growth they made on this test, and those people know what that means. So they're kind of we call it's our macro level assessment, um, but it can't be the whole thing. So then we do a lot of assessments. So precision teaching is really an assessment system where you're doing daily probes on the most important skills. So kids here do dozens of 1 minute timings a day on a variety of skills. We've got every one of those measures coming in every single day. And then we have a middle level of assessment where we're kind of looking at every 2 weeks, every 4 weeks, like assessing similar skills as they're working on day to day. So we can kind of see is the work that we're seeing, is the progress we're seeing in the classroom showing up on this test that's a little bit removed. It's kind of like our microscope into the classroom. And if it's not, then we need to do some problem solving. So I think that there's room for all three layers of assessment. If you just get day-to-day school data, it's hard to talk to people about what you're actually accomplishing. If you just get standardized testing, it's really hard to problem solve. Those are not tests that are built for instructional problem solving or decision making. They're just to show growth. So
Sure. Yeah, that seems so. I mean, just with my own children in the school district that they're in, the tests that they take at the various times that they have to take them, um, it it is it's very like hammered into them like, hey, this is very important, and I
Mhm.
feel like it's so opposite of kind of how you described your use of standardized tests. Um, whereas I could be wrong. I think a lot of the teachers are probably operating under some sort of negative reinforcement contingency, like they have to do well on this, um and yeah, using it as a tool as opposed to like the end all or like the milestone marker is very interesting.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, the progress monitoring literature really comes kind of in a backwards way, comes out of behavior analysis. So the progress monitoring literature kind of emerged in the 80s from this guy, Stan Dino, who picked up a lot of it from Ogden Lindsley, who was the founder of Standard Acceleration Chart and Precision Teaching, and who's a behavior analyst. So kind of that idea of like we're going to assess behavior at different times and then make decisions sounds very much like what we as behavior analysts do, right? And
Right.
you're right, in schools, sometimes it becomes this high stakes testing and teachers are evaluated based on their like their big standardized testing, and I'm not a fan of that because there's just too many variables in place.
Hmm.
I don't think it's reasonable for teachers, but when you give those assessments as decision making tools, that's really useful. And to your point about how you talk to kids about it, like we always talk to kids about like assess because they come in and they're like, oh no, assessments, like oh, I got a
Yeah.
test, I hate
Yeah.
this. I'm like, assessments are valuable. You treat them to show you what you know. You
Hmm.
can show off on it. And if you don't know something, that's fine because that just tells us that we have to teach it. So we try
Yeah.
to drop the high stakes out of it. Like, you need to try your best on it so that we actually know what you know. Because I'll have some kids in the fall who come in and I see their tests and I'm like, there's no way that this is where they really are. And I want to make sure you're getting instruction at your level. But yeah, it should be a problem solving tool. And I think when I work with general ed teachers in schools, they feel the same way. Right. So that's when they
Gotcha.
find those assessments valuable. And like when it tells them what to do as an instructor versus just is like a judgment on what they've already done.
Gotcha. You mentioned the chart and precision teaching. I think a lot of people, when they think Morningside model or generative instruction, they probably associate that like solely with the use of the chart and things like that. I don't want to have a bunch of. I know the chart folks are a tight knit community. I don't want to have a bunch of angry chart people after me. So I do want to talk about it a little bit. But how is it useful? I do you have trouble like integrating it when you like consult with other school districts and things like that? Like, or do you at all as a tool for measuring progress?
Yeah, so it's a big part of what we do here. So there's kind of these six major components of this model. We always talk about the six pillars. One of them is that we focus on component skills of whatever the grade level curriculum is. We don't focus on that. We look at what are the underlying skills that students need. That's the first thing we do. The second thing is that we group kids based on their strengths and weaknesses, not by their age grade. And that's honestly the most important thing that we do. Is put kids in similar classes based on what instructional needs they have. Then once we kind of got good groups formed, we've got the components that we're going to work on. We use direct instruction or methodics, which is kind of the underlying tool or the underlying philosophy behind DI to get accuracy. And then that's where the precision teaching comes in for us. So there's the fluency building procedure, which you don't necessarily need a standard acceleration chart to do frequency building. There's a lot of
Hmm.
research on frequency building is a good intervention, regardless of whether or not you use the standard acceleration tool. There's research showing you get even better gains when you use the chart. So the chart is a tool that we bring in once students are accurate with a given skill, like 90, 100% accurate. And then we say, okay, now it's time to speed it up. Like now, just being able to do something correctly is not enough. If it takes me, an hour to solve five math problems and those are all correct, that's very different than if it takes you 15 minutes to solve those five problems. Right. So we don't want to take time out of behavior like that. I think sometimes that dimension gets dropped out too quickly and time's essential. So once we build skills to accuracy, then we use fluency. And the chart, more than anything, is the best decision-making tool we can find. So that's why we stick to it. We are empirical people. So if you were to come up to me and say, I've got a better tool, here's the data, like, close your ears, chart people. But I would say like, oh, we're not going to use the chart then because there's a better tool, but haven't seen anything even close. So that's where it's useful. And then I'll just say, so then once we've got fluent behaviors, then the next two big parts of this model are teaching kids how to use those behaviors in the real world. So the things they learn in school aren't just a bunch of school learning tasks, they're actually applicable. And then teaching kids ways in which they can combine stuff they have already learned in new ways to solve problems. And so then taking the chart to schools is interesting. Um, I don't have that. I don't get as much pushback as people think when I go take it to public schools. Um, Mostly because we don't try to teach teachers all about like here's all the thousands of things you can do with this chart and look how cool it is and it's a ratio scale and that's really impressive. Like that's not what teachers are trying to learn about. Some people just get into it, right? Some people enjoy that whole aspect, but chart people love all those aspects about it. I'm one of those people, but I know that for teachers, it's about like, well, what does this give me? And it gives them decision making. So we kind of constrain it to like, here's this chart, here's why we use it, let's go. And we start putting data down. We teach kids how to chart. So
Yeah.
teachers don't do a lot of charting. The kids do most of the work. We teach first graders and up how to chart. We've got a partner school we're working with in Iceland. They've got 5 and 6 year olds charting. So like you can get it's honestly easier to teach children to chart than adults because adults go,
Cool.
why is it blue and why is it ratio scaled and what is all this? And kids are just like, okay, so I just put this dot here and I look at my chart and dots going up is good and dots flat meaning to do something about it. So it just makes decision making easier. You can do this quick visual analysis where you can look at dozens of standard acceleration charts and just look at the trend, or charters call it deceleration. And is it going up? Great, keep going. Is it not? Then we need to do an intervention. We need to change something. So teachers in
Gotcha.
schools are since I've been going to schools for a long time now, probably 15, 16 years, and it's gotten easier to get them charting. They always want a digital chart. I don't have a good one for them that works at scale for the number of kids that are charting and the number of charts we've got going. But yeah, it's always kind of surprising to me when teachers are like, oh, this is the value, decision making. Great, I'll learn how to do that.
Yeah, gotcha. You mentioned having gen ed teachers working at Morningside, then also working with gen ed teachers and while consulting and things like that. What other like barriers are there to even in like basic like foundational understanding or like conceptual backing or something like that when you're going in like trying to essentially change a system or improve a system at least. What other barriers do you kind of run into like walking into like day one walking into a classroom and saying here
Yeah,
you go.
that's a good question. So some of it's scalability issues. Part of it, I think the biggest challenge is that all of these technologies, precision teaching, direct instruction, work most effectively when kids are grouped by achievement level. So we call it homogeneous achievement grouping. Like the data on that is through the roof. Like for schools who just switch to that, like just grouping kids based on strengths and weaknesses versus how old they are, we always joke like how tall they are. It's a really strange variable to group kids by how old they are, given that all kids don't start school till like 5 or 6 years old, right? So we kind of
Yeah,
just ignore that first 5 years of history, which at least in the US is all over the place, right?
sure.
If you ever sat in a kindergarten classroom, like the range of repertoires is unbelievable.
Yeah,
So that's the first thing. Like without that, then doing things like direct instruction is a lot more challenging because DI materials are designed for homogeneous achievement groups. Precision teaching is a little bit more flexible, but that's one of the hardest things. And school districts are not set up to do homogeneous achievement grouping. Like when I talk to teachers about that, it's rare that a teacher would tell me they don't like that idea. Like every teacher is
yeah,
like, yeah, you're preaching to the choir. If you gave me 60 or you give me 30 kids and they're all at the same level and I could teach for an hour and it's right at everyone's level versus having to differentiate to 4 groups of kids and they all get 15 minutes, but they don't really because I got to give the lower performing kids 30 minutes and then the high kids don't get any time. Like everybody buys into that. It's more of a structural problem. Schools are not set up for it. They could be. There's plenty of schools who do that and get really, really good outcomes. But I think that's kind of the first and biggest challenge. Another challenge that we deal with a lot when we're going to schools is often the schools who ask us for help have been struggling, right? And as a function of that, we're probably not the only people who've ever come there trying to help out those schools. So there's
gotcha.
kind of an attitude from teachers, which is completely understandable of like, yeah, 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 here's another people coming in doing their thing. And like, if I just kind of wait it out, there's no point in learning this because in 2 years, they're going to have some other guy coming in telling them to try something
Yeah,
different. I think that's a real issue. And that's where we tap back into our basic principles of well, then we need to get these people to contact reinforcement for what we're training them to
mm,
do. Right? I can tell
gotcha.
them all day how great it is. I can show data all day, but everybody who comes through there shows them data. Right? And there's a lot of people
Yeah,
out there in the education world. I think that's one of the challenges that especially when I talk to people in the behavior analysis world who are like, we could save the world, we can fix schools, and I'm like, I know, but there's a lot of people out there saying that. So we're not the
right,
only ones. So
right.
I think getting people in contact with the with reinforcement, which is really the success of their kids. The vast majority of teachers that I work with, that's what they want. That's what they're motivated by. Like, can their kids move through the day effectively and efficiently? Um, it's actually gotten a little bit easier since I've been doing this. Like, there's a lot of stuff that's kind of in the behavioral ed world, things like explicit instruction, that has kind of seeped its way into schools. So if 15 years ago, if I went and talked about Anita Archer's like I do, we do, you do framework, which is just a more teacher-friendly version of the Engelman direct instruction people's Model E test. Now, any school I go to has heard that language. Everybody, like not even in this country. When I went to Iceland for the first time, they all knew that language. So people know
Hmm.
that. So the idea of explicit instruction is not foreign. It used to be kind of like you're doing this top-down instruction, and we don't like that. And increasingly, like teachers know about that, and we can kind of tap into that and just help them refine their decision making and their instruction.
Gotcha. Yeah, we had Margot from Cabas. I said K-Bos and she said no, it's Cabas, so I gotta
Yeah,
say it right. But
cool.
the school in Kalamazoo. Um, I'll paraphrase. I don't remember exactly what she said, but something about your presence in the classroom signifies that that teacher has done something wrong or like is not fulfilling some sort of duty
Yeah.
that they're supposed to be doing. Otherwise, you wouldn't be there. So yeah, that collaboration has to be challenging, especially to your point of, hey, if maybe if I wait this out, this guy won't even be here in a few
Right.
weeks
And
anyways. So,
that's a really good point because in schools, when teachers are being observed, it is almost always like punitive, or it's like it's a requirement that everyone knows we're going to do once a year. Like
mm,
principal comes in, sits in the back of the classroom with a clipboard, fills out some stuff because they have to. So a big shift for us is getting people to trust that we're coming in all the time. So we're really big on active coaching. So when we do training, we don't do these big long training workshops. Like the data on that is not very good. Even if you've got the best training workshops or people are doing role playing, they're getting feedback live, the application is about 2 to 5% of
oh
those
well,
skills. So like we know that that number jumps up to like 80% application when you coach. So we coach a lot. So new teachers at Morningside get coached 3, 4, 5 days a week. We're coming in for 20, 30-minute segments. We're coaching on like small subset of skills, like within a broader teaching repertoire. And same when we go on the road. So when we go to schools, like we come in frequently. And every time we come in, we're going to find a bunch of great things you did. And we're going to give you a couple things to work on. And then we're going to come back the next day. And you're going to get a bunch of reinforcement because you probably did those things. So it's this like slow shaping process that we would do with children, we do with teachers.
mm,
And a lot of schools that is new and novel and scary. So there's some kind of like, what is this at first? And then what's interesting, like every school without fail, eventually people start competing over who gets coaching time. Like I'm getting emails like, can you come in? Like you're going to be here next week. Can you come in and check out my class? And that's how coaching is designed to be. Like initially we use it to kind of build some repertoires, but eventually I get messages from teachers at Morningside all day long. They're like, hey, I'm trying to run this lesson. It's not going well. Can you pop down and give me some feedback? So
cool.
it's a different approach to coaching, but I think it's really valuable.
Yeah, when your mentees are asking for feedback, yeah, it's always a good sign. Um, do you think, I mean, going in and kind of coaching on evidence-based practice, behavioral approaches, um, on kind of the micro level, uh, do you think that's the answer to kind of affecting things on like a macro scale, like, like United States wide education system? I mean, I know there's a lot going on always, on many levels, politically, socially, things like that. But as far as influencing, and maybe it's a good time to chat about Project Follow Through too, if anyone's unfamiliar with Project Follow Through.
Yeah, that's a really good question. That's a really tricky one. I don't think that going in like one school at a time is the way that we would solve an education crisis. And I always have to qualify a little bit because schools in America, it's really tricky. People like to point out like the big international standardized test scores and say, oh, we're 16th in the world or whatever, and we should be higher. But if you look at all those countries above us, they're almost always super homogenous. They're generally smaller geographically, or they're schools in which not everybody goes to school. So in the US, everyone goes to school. It's such a heterogeneous country. And there's pros and cons to that in terms of education. So school policy decisions are not made at a federal level here. As much as there's always talk about like how federal funding and federal initiatives really like those don't move the needle as much as we'd like them to. Even like the Bush era No Child Left Behind stuff, which was controversial, got like there's some really good reading growth that came out of that. And there's some cool things that got into the school culture as a function of that. But it's still like we always say turning around American ed is like turning around a battleship. Like it is huge. It takes forever. You can't just change it overnight. and the decisions about like what schools are doing are a state level decision, but really they're really a regional level. You know, the district to district varies so much. So it's hard. There's not going to be like a one size fits all thing that like the federal government's going to put down that's going to magically fix schools like that. We're just not set up
Sure.
that way. Some of that's good because it makes us more resilient to bad ideas. You know, if something comes in federally that could just completely destroy what people are doing. So there's some pros and cons there. I think that structurally though, there's things that would need to happen in order for schools to be where we would want them to be. The homogeneous achievement grouping is the number one thing. Like that's the thing that if we could advocate for one thing, just do this. Like that's what we would do. That's a hard sell for a lot of people, but that to me is like the number one thing you could do structurally to get things in place. But also schools have to do too much, frankly. You know, it's like funding gets cut on all these other social services, and then the schools are asked to do it, and then the school budgets get cut. So they're asked to do more with less. But because school people care about kids, like they're going to try their best to do the work. But it's like the funding gets cut, you're asked to do more, and then people complain when you don't do it as well as they'd like them to. So I
Sure.
have when I first got into this work, and I hear persistent teachers and behavior analysts kind of rail against teachers and some of the school systems, I would be like, yeah, it's a disaster. And then you get in the weeds with schools, and you're like, man, these are good people who are dealing with very difficult challenges that are not simple fixes, unfortunately. The project follow through data is really interesting. So in the 60s, the LBJ Foundation or administration funded this big research study on what works for children. Like what are the instructional procedures or methodologies that would work? And there was, I think, like 11 or 12 different camps out there who kind of put their name in the ring for like to try out their approach to schools all over the U.S. And the data is like pretty remarkable. Like the direct instruction approach is by far the most successful across just about every single measure, reading, writing, math, but even things like positive social image, like their kids' self-esteem went up. Behavior analysis had a group of people working in that, and they had like the second best results. A lot of the different models had like negative results. Kids did worse with those models in place, and that data kind of got hidden. The
Hmm.
um, the outcome was kind of to say, well, those models, behavior analysis and direct instruction, are obviously working. So therefore, we should fund some of the other models so that they can improve their practices and try to be as effective as DI. So the stuff kind of never really got out there. It's really well known in the direct instruction world, the precision teaching world. Behavior analysis kind of knows about it, but if you mention project follow through to schools, they've never heard of it ever. And so that's important. So we'll talk about that with teachers. Like, you know, there is these tools that have been out there for a long time that work. And direct instruction is tried and true. I mean, it has limitations, but in general, like it works. It's a hard sell for teachers, to be honest with you. I mean, teachers don't love the idea of reading a scripted program to their students.
Mm.
And the schools who adopt DI well, I think, um, use those scripted programs initially, and then teachers really learn how those programs work so they can actually make decisions. Because we've talked about scaling briefly, in order to scale up something like direct instruction to schools all over the country, you have to take all the decision making out of it.
Mm.
You can't program in for what decisions, you know, millions of teachers across the US would make based on their, you know, tens of millions of kids who you've never met before. So it
Right.
really scripts it into kind of like an algorithm where the teacher decision making is limited. And that can be frustrating when teachers see kids struggling because maybe those kids are not a good fit for that program and they feel unable to make changes. So
Gotcha.
our teachers here, we spend a lot of time training them on kind of the underlying principles behind direct instruction, how to use those scripts effectively, and then how to make decisions, add stuff, take stuff out as they need to, so they can really be responsive to the learner. So it's hard to scale up decision making. That's kind of
Yeah.
that's a difficult thing.
Gotcha. Gotcha. Um, you mentioned Iceland, I believe Hawaii.
Yeah.
Where else are you guys operating out of at the moment?
So we've been in, like I said, over 150 schools at this point, agencies. Big projects in the 90s in particular, Chicago, New Orleans schools, Seattle schools. Um, Morningside worked with a lot of schools in the Bureau of Indian Affairs, a lot of schools in Hawaii. That's where I kind of got started in the 2010s. And now we're in, so we got like 6 or 7 schools we're working in. Iceland's been a really cool project. We're in our 4th year there. These people had already used direct instruction procedures to design a reading curriculum because I can't read Icelandic. It's 4 years of going there. I can kind of make most of the sounds at this point, but it's tough. So I told them like I can't help you with curriculum design, but I can help you with um, teaching procedures. I can help you with standard acceleration charting, and they're doing amazing things. Like their data is unreal. I'll be there next week, which is always a joy to be there. We got a big school, a high school in northwestern Pennsylvania and Butler, Pennsylvania. I'm working with initially high schoolers and now middle school kids who are multi years behind in reading and math. And we did a pilot project last year and got really pretty astounding gains. Kids making 2 and 3 years growth in 4 or 5 months. We've got a project in Wyoming, in Evanston, Wyoming, small rural town near the Utah border. It's pretty fantastic. These got a kindergarten teacher from there came out to our summer institute like 7 years ago, went home and just started doing as much precision teaching as possible. And last year we started going out and working with them formally, and they already had so many things in place. It's been really cool. It's cool to go to a school like that where they've never had people come and do consulting. They've never had outside people. So anything we say, they're really excited to put it in place. We're starting this year helping out this pretty amazing woman, Meg Gary, who launched the charter school in Nashville. So we've been out there a couple of times, and we've had some ongoing projects in Boston and Toronto for a few years. So I think 6 or 7 schools going on right now. And that's usually about where we like to be, because it's a pretty small crew of people who know this work really well, who kind of live all over the country and can go have been in enough schools and know how you adapt things as you move around, because it looks very different everywhere we go.
Great, great. That's amazing. I'll kind of put the call out there if there's anybody in the audience that has any questions. It'll be the time to chat that in if you want to. Kind of like wrapping things up a little bit, unless there's anything else you want to chat on. I don't know if there's a good way to like sum up like one good, actionable step for, educators, administrators, policymakers, anybody out there in some sort of decision-making capacity, in terms of evidence-based procedures in education. There's any like one kind of call or word that you would kind of like put out there? What would that be?
Yeah, for school districts, it's homogeneous achievement grouping. Like I'm gonna be a broken record on that because it's just so powerful, and there's a ton of research on there on that. It's kind of gotten bogged down because in the '60s, schools did what was called tracking, where kids would get sorted into different classes based on strengths and weaknesses. But the problem was they never moved; they got stuck there. So it wasn't a decision making tool. It was really a way to sort kids. And like once you were in the low reader, they all had like cool bird names too. So if you were like a high reader, you were like a falcon or an eagle. But if you were low, you were like a bluebird or a robin. And like once you're a robin, you're always a robin. So it really soured a lot of people on that idea. And when you do it well, kids move constantly. So we do a lot of assessment because I'm constantly seeing like, oh, you know what? You learned the 2 or 3 things you needed. You were now ready to move up to the next curriculum level. So to do this well, there's constantly moving. So kids are always getting what's best for them. So we always talk about as homogeneous achievement grouping and avoid the tracking word because that really just throws teachers. But that's I would say for educators, that's the number one thing I'd look at. And for behavior analysts, I would just say like you can learn the chart. It's not scary. It's easy. Teach you how to do it. Every summer when people come out here, there's a lot of behavior analysts and they're like, all right, I finally decided to do it. And then after like a day of training, they're like, that's all it was. That's it. Yeah, that's it. And it'll just change your decision making. It'll change how quickly you can make decisions. It changes the way you look at growth. And so I just think just get over any fear you have of blue paper. It's blue because it's research based. So I mean, if you ever seen one of the black versions of that chart, like black and white one, it's not. You can't even read it. So
Oh, man.
you get used to it, and you'll find that it'll really inform your practice a lot. And so I always think it's really cool when behavior analysts come out here who don't work with the same populations that we do and learn that chart and then put it into practice and get really tell us about all the different ways that it's made their decision making, their practice that much more effective.
Gotcha. Gotcha. Yeah, years ago I worked for an organization that did solely charting, and I did learn it. It was to speak to your point, it was a very useful decision-making tool for sure. I don't know that I embraced it the way that I could have, because we incorporated other measures and things like that. And we weren't doing a lot of precision teaching either. So I think the two probably go hand in hand really well, more so than how I applied it. But
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, sure.
Well, cool. Thank you so much for joining us. I don't see any questions from the audience, so we can kind of wrap up. But Andrew Kieta is the executive director of Morningside Academy out in Seattle. Thanks again for joining us. We appreciate your time.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. This was fun.